Greetings, AMCers. My name's John Campia. Kevin MacDonald was already an Oscar-winning documentary filmmaker when he directed Forest Whitaker in The Last King of Scotland, which of course got Forest Whitaker his Acting Academy Award. He then went on to direct the highly underrated State of Play with actors like Russell Crowe, Helen Mirren, and Ben Affleck. And now he brings us The Eagle with Channing Tatum and Jamie Bell, a film I highly recommend you go out and see. This week I had a chance to sit down with Kevin MacDonald to talk about The Eagle, what parts of it were fact, what parts of it were fiction, what went into his decision-making process when casting the film, and a few things more. Here's our conversation. One of the things that jumped out at me quickly at first was the fact that whenever you see these sword and sandal Roman things, every skirmish has 100,000 soldiers, and everything is caught in the glimmering sunlight. And this, the Eagle had a much grittier kind of almost realistic feel to it. Was that by design? Was that your intent going into it? How did that all come about?
Yeah, I mean, it seemed to me like there's the kind of convention at the moment is that everything that takes place in a movie world, in the ancient world, has to be full of CG and fantasy and magic,
right?
And is mostly kind of studio bound because it's you know, things green screen and one thing and another. I'm thinking of Prince of Persia and those sort of movies. And I wanted to react against that. I wanted to make a movie that felt gritty and real, and where, you know, you could see the raindrops on their faces and the tiredness in their eyes, and you could, you know, the violence felt kind of authentic. And surprisingly few people have done that before. Surprisingly few people have actually tried to make kind of naturalistic version of that ancient world.
Now, one of the other things that got me was the story feels so fleshed out. It really feels like a myth and a fairy tale. How much of The Eagle and The Eagle of the Ninth, how much of that is based on fact? How much of that is based on fiction?
Well, you know, the film is based on a book which was published in the 50s, but which I read as a kid, as 11, 12-year-old, and it was one of my favourite kind of books at that period, you know, young adult sort of book. And at the time when that was written, people thought that the Ninth Legion of the Roman Empire had actually disappeared into thin air in Scotland. But subsequently, over the next sort of 50 years, it was revised, and people thought, well, actually, no, they probably didn't. That's just a myth. It's just a story. But weirdly, just in the last few years, there's sort of starting to find archaeological evidence around Hadrian's Wall, which suggests that actually the Ninth did suffer some catastrophic loss north of the wall, and so strangely, we're actually in more historical territory than, in a funny way, we thought we were. But also, the idea for me was really to make a movie which felt real, where everything with the culture feels real, where the armor people are wearing feels real, where the landscape feels, you know, authentic. To actually try and make people understand what it must have been like to live in those days. And maybe it's just because I come from a world of documentary, but to me that's sort of fascinating, and it's a fascinating challenge as well.
In talking about North of the Wall, in the film, they have this sense that all the Romans are talking in the film. I mean, whatever's beyond that wall, it's almost mythological. I mean, nobody really knows. And as an audience member, you really felt that. Like, I don't know what they're going to find out there.
Yeah.
They get out there and they find these tribes.
Yes.
And it's not what I, as an audience member, was expecting.
Yes.
The look of them, the way they acted. How did that all come about, the decision process, and to make those tribes north of that wall the way they were?
Well, you know, we know a lot about what the Romans looked like and kind of how they acted in a way and how their buildings were like, obviously from archaeology and writing, but we know nothing about what happened north of the wall, you know, on the other side of the Roman Empire, because Hadrian's Wall really was the sort of, Hadrian decreed that's the end of the empire, right there, and everything above that we don't care about.
In the movie, say it's the end of the world.
It's the end of the world, exactly. Right. And it really was. So yeah, you conjure up this sense of fear. It's kind of like, you know, Apocalypse Now, going up the river past the past the last bastion of American power, and so in reality we don't know what those tribes were like particularly. We know that from some of the descriptions in Roman authors that they painted themselves sometimes. And we know that they shaved their heads, and we know that from archaeology we know that they worshipped sea eagles and seals. And so we took those sort of elements and created a culture, but the idea was to create something that really felt anthropological. I didn't want them to sort of, to suddenly go from a very realistic film into a film where people look and act as though they're from some fantasy world. I wanted to feel like this culture could actually exist there, and they're a very violent and very aggressive culture. But at the same time, you also see little hints of just normal life, of everyday life. That actually, of course, they have their own love for their children. They have their own social codes, their own way of enjoying themselves, and you get little hints of that. So that they're a more fully rounded version. They're not like the Indiana Jones version of the terrifying tribe. They're actually meant to feel as though, oh, I actually do believe those. I do believe that those people existed.
Now, you mentioned, too, that your background is in documentary.
Yeah.
And yet you've done what I think is the greatest thing any film director can do. You directed an Oscar-winning performance. How was it for you? Like, why were you able to transition so smoothly from doing the things of documentary into narrative storytelling? And then what about that did you bring into The Eagle?
Well, I often think that because I come from documentary, I bring something unusual to feature films. I bring a sort of desire to get at the authenticity of things, to get a gritty texture to the film. But likewise, when I do fiction film, when I do non-fiction films, when I do documentaries, I kind of bring some of the storytelling ideas from fiction films. And even before I'd ever made a fiction film, before I made The Last King of Scotland, my documentaries had very strong narratives, very strong stories.
Right.
And so I think for that reason, it was easier for me, because I was somebody interested in narrative, to transition into fiction. But also with Last King of Scotland, with Forest Whitaker's performance, part of what made that performance so great was just that we did it in a way which was very naturalistic. We took Forrest to Uganda. We shot the whole film in Uganda. The car that he was driving was the real car that Idi Amin had been in. the people he was surrounded with on the set were all people who had experienced Idi Amin, who had lived through that. And so it's very hard to not be truthful when you're surrounded by people who say have lost their family to Amin. And so I think it's somehow trying to bring some reality to bear on the fiction, I think actually helps the actor. I think it helps the actor give a more authentic performance. And in this film as well, I think the fact that Channing, who's not an actor that people associate with a kind of period movie, I think the fact that he had to wear a uniform which was like the correct and historically accurate bit of armor or whatever, that meant that he walked differently, and he started to act differently because he's walking differently, and because he's in a set which is like a real, we built a real small fort made out of mud and wood, which is based on the designs of what the forts would have been like. So, and the rooms are all there, and you can walk in and out, and it starts to make you understand what it was like to be in that period. And I think it makes it easier for an actor. I think it makes it possible for an actor to really sort of get into the role.
Now, you and I talked a little bit before about State of Play, which you walk onto that set not having a ton of narrative behind you, and you, right in front of you, have, first of all, 3 Academy Award winners. You have Ben Affleck, Helen Mirren, Russell Crowe, and even the junior of that, Rachel McAdams, is pretty well esteemed.
Yeah.
Was that at all intimidating for you as
hugely intimidating? Hugely intimidating, of course. Yeah, no, I mean, it's only my second narrative film, and the story of how that movie came to being was kind of extreme anyway, because to begin with I was going to do it with Brad Pitt, and then he pulled out because we had differences over the script, and so I had this whole kind of Hollywood crazy experience of movie stars and things, which was utterly alien to me. But it's a little intimidating. But I think that when you're working with people of that caliber, it's kind of quite easy as a director sometimes, because you point the camera at them and they'll do something great, and oftentimes directors get credit for performances when actually they haven't done very much. I mean, a lot of the best directors, you ask them, how did you get that performance? They don't really say anything to the actors. It's just they create the atmosphere and they wind the actors up and off they go. And I think that often it's the case. You know, if you say the few correct things right at the beginning, and in very simple few instructions about who this character is, what the world is, what the tone of the film is, then I think the best actors just sort of go with it.
Now, I brought that up because one of the things that really jumped out at me when I heard that you were directing The Eagle was the juxtaposition of going from something of State of Play, where you have all these major heavyweights, into The Eagle, where Channing Tatum is still relatively new. Jamie Bell, despite Billy Elliot, which is actually like 10 years old now, is still considered relatively new.
Yes.
What was that? How was that transition for you as a director, going from one extreme of all these heavyweights into a set in a film where you're probably the most experienced guy now?
Well, no, because I actually that was part of why I cast Channing and Jamie, because I wanted to have the experience of working with younger stars who have a kind of freshness and enthusiasm to them that more experienced people don't have, but also because you can put those younger stars through their paces in a way. You could get they had a really tough physical time shooting this film, The Eagle. We were shooting it in Scotland in the top of mountains. It was pissing with rain. It was really uncomfortable. It was freezing cold. There were whole scenes in rivers and that kind of thing. And it'd be hard to get Russell Crowe to do that kind of stuff. But Channing is so enthusiastic and so still has such incredible energy and optimism and enthusiasm that he'll do anything. Jump in the river again. Yeah, I mean, he goes. That's what he's like.